I've been going back and forth on whether to do this episode now for a while. For quite some time, actually, I've wanted to do an episode talking about Peter Molyneux, and obviously now the time is kind of ripe with the controversy over his Goddess Kickstarter stuff and the rock, paper, shotgun interview. Although, because of that, any further criticism of the man runs the risk of coming across as bullying. And I also don't like to focus on individuals so much, just because singling someone out can sometimes lead to further harassment of the person and death threats, and don't do those, okay? Don't be a dick. But at the same time, ever since the rock, paper, shotgun interview and Molyneux's recent press tour, where he said he's not going to talk to anyone anymore and he hasn't got a reputation and he's depressed and feels sorry for him, a lot of people have come out defending him, acting like he's being pilloried right now over one little mistake, which I feel is not entirely fair to those criticising Molyneux, because it ignores years and years of easily traceable behaviour, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. I would like to talk about the Molyneux cycle in what I hope is a very fair, very reasonable way. So let's give that a go. Enjoy. 2004, the official Lionhead forums. Peter Molyneux, in a wave of humility and sorrow, apologises to the community over missing features in Fable on Microsoft's debut console, the Xbox. If I have mentioned any feature in the past which, for whatever reason, didn't make it as I described into Fable, I apologise, he said. Every feature I've ever talked about was in development, but not all made it. I have come to realise that I should not talk about features too early, so I'm considering not talking about games as early as I do. Of course, as we all know, the supposed revelation of Peter's did not mark the end of him promising features that never saw the light of day, of talking about video games too early and being unable to deliver. Fable was the first major game in which Molyneux promised the world and delivered a glass cage. It was a game he said would be different, because it was a good RPG in a world of shit ones. It was a game in which he said you could plant an acorn and have it grow into an oak tree over the course of the game. He promised NPCs that would seek vengeance on you, a fully open world a la Elder Scrolls, trees you could permanently scar, kids you could have and play as if your original character died, and much, much more. When Fable 2 was being hyped, Molyneux officially began what I call the Molyneux cycle. He naturally hyped the sequel to High Heaven, promising it would be this deep, engaging, enriching experience, make good on all the broken promises of the first, and then he slagged the original game off. Urging an interviewer not to play the original Fable, he claimed the Xbox title was a glass vase that had been stuck together slightly wrongly. He said mechanics just didn't work or weren't shown properly, and that the story was not told with any skill. But of course, Fable 2 would be everything Fable wasn't. Of course it would, and that is the Molyneux cycle. Tell us the next game is going to be amazing, while the last game was rubbish. It's a routine the man has perfected over years, and despite it being as predictable as it is insulting, he's rarely been directly challenged over it. After Fable 2 failed to be the greatest thing ever, the Molyneux cycle shifted forward a game. In the lead up to Fable 3, Molyneux insulted Fable 2, which of course had been out for long enough to get as many sales as possible. Yes, the game he was happy to praise while he was selling it to us now had, in his words, a rubbish story. Naturally, he pulled this stunt as Fable 3 was being promoted and promised once more that Fable 3 would improve upon its predecessor. And can you guess what Molyneux said while Fable the Journey was being promoted? That's right, Fable 3 was, months after it had already been released, now deemed a train wreck by Peter in another wave of affected humility. He claimed to agree with the reviews that said it wasn't good enough, that it wasn't the cutting-edge game he promised it was, and that in future they have to make Fable 4 amazing. This was around the time he repeatedly said Fable the Journey was not on rails, and when Fable the Journey came out, it was on fucking rails. Peter Molyneux's tactic of promising the world for his new game while shamelessly shitting all over his last game was an obvious play years ago, and he's still doing it today with 22 Cans and Goddess, the game recently under the microscope after, surprise surprise, it turned out a Molyneux game wouldn't be able to fulfill all the features it had promised in its Kickstarter campaign. Goddess represents possibly the worst, most insulting incarnation of the cycle, cycle, as Molyneux, while trying to hype us up for his new game The Trail, not only threw out his usual dramatised apologia for the Goddess game, but threw Kickstarter itself under the bus, calling his use of the crowdfunding endeavour a destructive force that made him overpromise. After years of interviews in which he allegedly cries and promises not to promise things anymore, the millionaire blamed Kickstarter for giving him the urge to, and I quote, say anything to get £100,000 out of his audience. Except of course, Peter was an overpromising under-deliverer years before Kickstarter was ever a thing, and in a world where beautiful Kickstarted experiences like Darkest Dungeon exist, I think what he said here is perhaps the most irresponsible thing he's ever said. For all his pretense of placing the blame on himself, he never actively takes responsibility. It's never quite his fault, even when he says it's his fault. He says he just gets too excited, he says crowdfunding made him do it, and he'll promise not to do it again, except he always does it again. After years of this cycle, I can't trust his wholly sincere. By his own admission, he's prepared to say anything, and I think that's his problem. He's exhibited in the past that he will say anything to get his way. Molyneux's clockwork pantomime was galling when he was making big budget games for Microsoft, but now he's in the indie world, it's the real destructive force here. His failure to deliver with Goddess reflects poorly on crowdfunding as a whole, a system that has produced many successes but suffers from a shaky reputation due to, well, companies like 22 Cans, companies that will say anything to get 100,000 quid from you and then produce a hollow apology later. The examples of the cycle I've talked about here are not the full extent of Peter's behaviour and propensity for hype. I mean, we've not gone near Milo or the God of Gods bullshit, but when you gather these major examples together, you see an incredibly shameless routine that is years and years old. Rock Paper Shotgun's recent interview with Molyneux was brutal, some would say too brutal. However, it also did things nobody else in the games press has done when they've interviewed him. It actually pinned him down and made him face what people were thinking without dressing it up. After years of kid glove interviews designed to garner sympathy for him and his passion, it was at least refreshing not to see him treated like a cheeky little scamp, a fun, bumbling buffoon with his silly, naughty promises that make us laugh. Because I don't think Peter Molyneux's behaviour is particularly funny. It's not a fun meme. People are acting as if he's being raked over the coals now for one little Kickstarter fuck-up, but that forgets years of frankly insulting statements and promises. Even as he told The Guardian he wouldn't talk to the press anymore, it was suggested he told 2 other outlets the same thing. And who even believes it? He'll be back. He always comes back. And if he told me the sky was blue, I'd look out the window to fucking double check. For the record, I don't dislike Peter Molyneux. I think he's a talented man. I do admire that he gives a shit. It just would have been better for the past 20 years had he done a lot less talking like he said he was gonna back when Fable came out, and it was, you know, yet another promise he didn't keep. I think it would have been better had, because Peter's not the only guy working on his games, he's always working with a big studio. Maybe let the people who are doing the day-to-day groundwork development, who know what features are and aren't in the game, do a lot more of the talking, because we've heard these stories of him promising something in a game, going back to the studio and the people panicking because they don't know why he promised that thing, because they didn't know it was coming. So let them do more of the talking, maybe. You know, I don't believe this end of talking to the press that he's promised is coming, but even then, maybe change the script, Peter, because I don't think we're stupid, and I would hope you don't think we're stupid, but even with the Rock Paper Shotgun interview, you can see Peter trying to predict John Walker's headlines and the quotes he's going to mine, and talk about how depressed he is. He was already setting up the narrative to be the victim, to have another one of those interviews where the interviewer talks about his voice cracking and the tears in his eyes, which at this point, after so many times, just looks like an act. You know, it might not be an act, but it certainly fucking looks like one when all the interviews go the same fucking way for years and years and years. Change it up, Pete. You know, or actually just stick to not talking to the press, and just make a game, have it come out, speak for itself, and have it turn out to be good, maybe. That would be nice. So anyway, that's what I think about Peter Molyneux. I do think he's a talented man. I just think that this act is tired and needs to stop. But then again, people say that about the Jimquisition, and I'm still here, so thank God for me. That wasn't supposed to happen. I had a whole bit where I was going to do a joke about how I didn't say thank Goddess for me, and then that happened. I apologise, it won't happen again. I'm sorry I did that.